And welcome back to Patience is a Virtue, the YouTube channel devoted to finding value in future sports wagering. I'm your host, Andrew, and on today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the knockout stages of the Gold Cup. So we've made it through the group stage, and now we are down to the final 8 nations. And so far, haven't really seen any surprises. The nations that we fully expected to get through have actually gotten through. So let's go ahead and take a look at the results of the group stage. So Group A finished with Mexico in first place and Costa Rica in second. Group B, Canada in first place and Honduras in second. Group C was Panama in first place and Guatemala in second. And Group D is the USA in first and Saudi Arabia came in second. That means that our matchups in the knockout stages are the US versus Costa Rica, Canada versus Guatemala, Mexico versus Saudi Arabia, and Panama versus Honduras. Now, I think this actually sets up pretty well for the US. They really ought to be able to advance past Costa Rica. They defeated them earlier this year, 3-0, and they've won 7 of the last 10 head-to-head matchups between these two squads. And they really are the stronger team, and they're on home soil. So I do expect the U.S. to be able to advance. However, I do think it is going to be kind of a lower scoring game. If you enjoy betting individual matches, I think the under could be a solid look in this situation. I think the U.S. might end up pulling it out 1-0 or possibly 2-0. Maybe Costa Rica gets on the board, but I think this is going to be a tight affair, and goals might not be scored until possibly the second half, maybe even in the later stages. So this won't be a cakewalk for the U.S., but I do think that they will be able to advance. Now, if you don't have a future on the U.S. at this point, I do want to point out that most books are actually offering them at plus 200 to win this competition, which is a bit of a longer price from when the competition started. They were around 175 or 185. So the prices have gotten just a little bit longer, which means the bookies have not really fancied their path nearly as much as what you would have expected for a team that easily won its group stage. Now, taking a look at Mexico, if you took a future on them before the tournament started, I would just stand pat with where you're at. They have looked solid so far, and they should be able to get past Saudi Arabia. I don't see any issues with that. But I do think there is likely the potential for a semifinal game against Panama. And Panama is a good squad. You might not think it, but they really are a tough team. They're able to put up goals, and they're able to have a tight defense. I do think Mexico should be able to advance past Panama, but I would give the Panamanians a little bit of a better shot than a lot of people do to be able to advance to the final. So I don't want to take any more money out on Mexico at this point, especially because that would simply be the semifinal game and not even the final. So right now, if you have a ticket on Mexico, I would go ahead and stand pat. If you have a ticket on Panama, again, I would go ahead and not actually add more at this point, especially because the price has actually been about cut in half once they've gotten through the group stage. Right now, it's around plus 800. And that's still a great price, but you were able to get closer to about plus 1,500 before the tournament started. I think this could end up being a pretty good hedge piece if Panama are able to get past, well, obviously get to the game against likely Mexico and then be able to get past them. This could be a ticket on them, could be a very solid hedge position. So if you don't have something on Panama, you could consider putting just a little bit of money down on that. Now, I wouldn't bet much. We're talking like maybe 10% or 20% of your normal unit size. So not a whole lot on Panama because I don't expect them to actually win the whole tournament, but you could do a good job of setting yourself up for a nice hedge position. Now, if you like Canada, I do expect them to fairly easily cruise through their first knockout stage game against Honduras, and then they're probably going to be playing the USA. Now, the US will be favored in that match, and again, they are going to be the home squad as this tournament is taking place in America. But I really give Canada a very good chance of being able to advance past the Americans into the final. Honestly, I think that with the American squad, what it is, I think you're looking at around 50-50 on who will be able to advance from that position. So a ticket on Canada could be very valuable, again, as a hedge position, but I think you're going to get a lot of value in them because I think they could ultimately make the final. So if you have something on Canada, I think you're sitting pretty well right now. So how do we want to play this? Again, if you have a ticket on Mexico, I would not actually buy any more futures on them. What you might want to consider doing is just doing it's really not a money line rollover, an advance rollover, right? You can bet for which team is going to advance past it. Money line is going to be on the actual 90-minute game. To advance is who is just going to ultimately progress through the tournament. You might make just as much money depending on what the lines end up being and who the matchups end up being for Mexico to simply advance in their next games. Not so much against Saudi Arabia, although you probably can just go ahead and do that. I do expect them to be able to get past Saudi Arabia. But that way, you're not exposing yourself to a ticket that would only cash after the tournament ends. And again, we're only talking about plus 150. So if you're thinking about Mexico, I would strongly consider doing just simply an advance kind of money line rollover as opposed to just taking a future ticket. Now, if you like the US, if you already have a position on them, you might want to add just a little bit more, again, simply because the price has lengthened. But I would be very wary about Canada. So I would probably hold pat on the US as well, and I wouldn't make any plays at this point. Um, and if you want to, you could consider playing something in the actual individual match of the US and Canada if that ends up being what the semifinal looks like. Now, if you like Canada, again, you can get them at about plus 500 or so. A future here, I think, could be a good position. I wouldn't go a full unit on that, but I think you do have a good chance of setting yourself up for a decent hedge position, especially if Canada is able to advance past the US. And I do give them a decent shot of being able to do that. But just like Mexico, you might actually be able to make a little bit more money if you simply start playing the money line rollover. Now, I don't think that's really going to work out in their first matchup. But if you're talking about against the US and then ultimately whoever they be playing in the final, I do think there is a decent chance that you might make a little bit more money on Canada to simply advance and then win the cup. Kind of depends on how you want to play it. But plus 500 would be a pretty good price for Canada. And that price hasn't really changed very much. It's shortened just a small amount from when the tournament started, but they're pretty much at about the same position. So there is still that value there. And finally, looking at Panama. Now, again, I don't expect them to win the cup, but a plus 800 ticket could be pretty valuable, especially if you think that they have a decent chance of getting past Mexico. It certainly would set you up for a nice hedge position. And so, again, maybe taking a small nibble on Panama could be a good option moving forward. So I know that was kind of talking around a little bit and didn't really give you a whole lot of solid plays. But what we're really looking at is potential semifinal matchups of the US and Canada. And I think that's going to be a pretty tight match. Maybe favor the US around 60-40, 55-45, something like that. But that's close to a toss up. And then Mexico, Panama. Mexico really is 60-65% to win, but don't sleep on Panama. They have a good shot. So if you think there could be a little bit of an upset here, maybe think about tickets on Canada and Panama. You might be able to get one of those to go through to the final to go ahead and see if you can hedge on that if you really like how it's breaking down, or if you think they got a good option. And then if you like the US or Mexico, who again are the more likely teams to advance to the final, I think you might want to just go ahead and stand pat, or you could consider just go ahead and taking these teams to advance in each of the individual games as opposed to taking a future on them. So right now, that's what I'm taking a look at. Hopefully you've got some good futures already lined up, and you've got some better prices than what they're at this point. And so you don't have to worry too much about hedging, but this could also be an opportunity now that we know the path and how these teams likely will break down. If you think you need to buy somebody, this will be the best time, because the longer it goes in the tournament, the worse the price is going to get as the team is able to advance. And really, this is a small tournament, so there's only 3 more games, and then we're going to be all decided, or 3 rounds, I guess I should say, before the whole thing is decided. So if you want to make a play, you're going to have to make it fairly soon, just to make sure that you're able to get those in and to get the prices that you want. And that's going to do it for this edition of Patience is a Virtue. Always remember, never gamble more than you can afford to lose. Make sure that you always are gambling responsibly. And remember, patience is a virtue.